We now turn to the keynote address for today's ceremony. Our speaker is Mr. David Wood, curator of the Concord Museum, a position he has held since 1985, for 34 years. There are few who are as deep-dyed in the history of the town of Concord, Massachusetts, as David Wood. He has written and spoken on the lives and works of great American authors, buried only a few yards from this spot, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau on Author's Ridge. And he has also taught and written about Concord citizens less well known than these famous authors. His interests extend to Concord's involvement in the American Civil War. In 2011, he created an exhibition for the Concord Museum entitled When Duty Whispers, Concord in the Civil War. It is in this capacity, as a scholar and student of Concord's involvement in that great war, that he is with us today as our keynote speaker. He will address us on the history and significance of the Melvin Memorial. Please welcome Mr. David Wood.
John, the first of the Melvin family to live in Concord, was here by 1700. What might be termed a Melvin family tradition of volunteer military service began with John's son David and continued through the 18th and 19th centuries. Amos Melvin is given credit for ringing the alarm bell in Concord in the pre-dawn hours of April 19, 1775. So it is perhaps not surprising that John and Samuel Melvin left their jobs in the textile mills of Lawrence to enlist for 3 years in the 14th Regiment of Infantry in response to President Lincoln's call for troops in the spring of 1861. The 1st Massachusetts Heavy Artillery joined the 14th Regiment, and together they became the 1st Regiment of Heavy Artillery, Massachusetts Volunteers. Their older brother Asa enlisted in the same company as John and Samuel, Company K, a year later, and near the end of the war, the youngest of the 4 Melvin brothers, 17-year-old James, joined the 6th Massachusetts Volunteers. Of the 4 Melvin brothers, only one survived his service during the Civil War. James in 1909 wrote, "At the close of the war, I was a poor lad of 17 with no assets except what nature had given me. At that time, I made a vow that I would sometime erect a fitting memorial to my 3 brothers. For more than 40 years, this has been in my mind, and it is nearly 30 years since Mr. French, one of the friends of my youth, was consulted. 5 years ago, he accepted my commission. The result is the beautiful and inspiring monument which you today have dedicated. I am certain you will all agree with me that the youthful hand that fashioned the Minuteman and in mature years created the Millmore Memorial has lost nothing of its cunning. May it forever stand a memorial to these 3 brave soldiers, and what is of vastly greater importance, an inspiration to future generations to follow the path of duty, though it may lead, as it did with these brothers, to that greatest sacrifice that can be made by man." James was 19 when 17-year-old and remained friends. This memorial, which occupies a privileged place at the very pinnacle of American public sculpture, derived from that friendship. But there's another memorial to John, Asa, and Samuel, a literary one, Samuel Melvin's diary. In 1863, Samuel Melvin got a new diary, received a very nice diary from Dow, the best one I have ever seen. Dow was John Dow, a sergeant in Company K. Samuel made an entry of 80 or 90 words nearly every day, recording details of life on garrison duty. Washington was surrounded by nearly 70 forts armed with enormous siege and field cannon that fired 24 and 30-pound projectiles, and manning the guns was the responsibility of the heavy artillery regiments. None of the forts was ever taken, and few were even attacked, so garrison duty could be fairly quiet. Samuel kept busy. He had an aptitude for electrical engineering and applied it to making some money on the side by gold-plating chains, belt buckles, and other items. Got some things for electroplating, and if I could get enough work, I could make money like smoke. set my battery up and gave the sergeant a shock. A few days later, he wrote, plated a chain for John Welsh and put on a good plate. Not every project was an immediate success. Worked all day trying to plate a pistol for the sutler. Got all discouraged. Samuel was vexed with the pistol for several more days before he eventually succeeded in plating it, probably in nickel. Samuel's success was no accident. He studied electricity, metallurgy, science, he wrote in one entry, and he solved the problem of the pistol by corresponding with a man who supplied him with batteries and gold solution. Samuel studied more than metallurgy. Went to city with Dow, had a good time, bought Pope's work, $1.25, and he got a book on mythology. Pope is English poet Alexander Pope, whose translations of Homer made the Odyssey and the Iliad accessible to those without any Greek. Got Milton's Paradise, he recorded on another occasion. Samuel apparently built up quite a library. Inspection by Major Rolfe, that's Samuel's commanding officer, Frank A. Rolfe. He took a great shine to my library, told Shatswell I was a well-versed fellow. Despite the Pope and the Milton, Samuel's real interest lay in science. Studied surveying with hills. Like it first rate, he noted, which suggests he had some trigonometry. But his real interest was physics, which Samuel referred to by its alternative name, natural philosophy. Studied natural philosophy as usual, he wrote one day, and the next day, studied philosophy. The day after that, he wrote, read the encyclopedia, learned some new facts about philosophy, which I was glad to learn. 10 days later, he received Silliman's philosophy. It is first rate. I am much pleased with it. Silliman is Benjamin Silliman Jr., and the book is First Principles of Physics, or Natural Philosophy, designed for the use of schools and colleges. Within a week, Samuel wrote to Professor Benjamin Silliman, Yale College, New Haven, Connecticut. I like that kind of correspondence better than the silly newspaper gush. Although garrison duty did not entail combat, it was still dangerous due to the unsanitary conditions. Samuel's entry on October 9, 1863 reads in part, Brother John went to the hospital sick with the dysentery, which is the same disease that killed Abraham Lincoln's son Willie and nearly killed Louisa May Alcott during her nursing stint in Washington. He was very sick, the entry goes on. Asa was present. Doctor gave him opium, did no good, told me he could not live until noon. I was with him all the time. He failed very fast from the middle of the afternoon and died very easy at last at 11 o'clock at night. Samuel began 1864 with a resolution. Next year I shall be very punctilious and note everything in my new diary, which was a Christmas present from Dow. It is a good idea, and I cannot express the joy it afforded me in looking over John's diary when he had passed to the Summerland. Perhaps in some future day, after I shall have passed to the spirit life, someone may take as much pleasure in looking over this. Who can tell? Samuel's grief at John's death was in time eclipsed by his eager anticipation of the end of his enlistment. Great excitement over re-enlistment, he had written in November, adding, I did not. He had signed up in June of 1863 years service, and by February he was fairly counting the days. Put on citizen's clothes to see how I would look. I wish I was a citizen and could wear the clothes, he wrote at the beginning of the month. And on the last day, today is the last of the old winter, and one more muster will muster me where we wish to be, in civilian life. Samuel had plans for his civilian life. The studies he undertook were not just to relieve boredom. He had, in November, received a letter from Dow offering me a college education, and this may be why he corresponded with Professor Silliman at Yale. He was also planning a trip to England. The first entry in his new diary reads, Where will I be next New Year's Day? With Dow in London, I hope. In March, Company K was ordered to Fort Tillinghast, another of the garrison forts around Washington. Got up in the morning and washed in a mud puddle, Samuel wrote, adding, Don't think much of this fort or anything around it. The move was associated with a conversion of the artillery companies around Washington into infantry, which was part of General Grant's strategy for replacing troops lost in combat, as well as the many troops like Samuel Melvin, whose 3-year enlistments were about to end. Had an infantry drill in the afternoon, Samuel wrote on April 8th, the first I have drilled in 6 months. I did not see as I was any greener than the rest of them. The next day he mused, today is my birthday, 20 years today. When I am 20 more, I will be quite old, will I not? 3 weeks later he wrote, orders came for us to draw our camp and garrison equipage. This looks like moving, sure. Eventually the move came. Orders for us to move. We are going now into rough usage, I guess, but let it come. But if we go, I should like to return. This would be Samuel's first experience of combat. Heard firing, and it looks like hot work, he wrote on May 17th. This is a rough life, and one that I do not like, but I shall stand it like a man. Samuel was in the midst of what would come to be called the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, 2 weeks of fighting that saw little gain for either side, but heavy casualties for both. Struck our tents about noon, Samuel wrote on May 19th. Marched on quick time down a hill, then countermarched, lay on a hill, then went down and our battalion went after the Rebs. The fire was awful. I was taking another soldier to the rear. I had to leave him, and I saw the Rebs behind me. I surrendered. They did not fire after. I got a horse to ride, and the provost guard took me. I could not wish to be better treated. I slept rough, but was truly thankful for my treatment. Samuel was captured in Virginia and spent the next 2 weeks traveling the 700 miles to Andersonville Prison in Georgia. May 20th. Rather small rations, but the Rebs give as good as they can. I will be glad when this cruel war is over, but it must be fought to the bitter end. We are treated with great captors. May 21st. No rations all day. Marched all day, started early, did not rest nor have anything to eat. It was indeed truly painful. May 22nd. The guards were everlastingly kind to me. May 23rd. I shall be glad when we get to our journey's end, where we can get something to eat. May 24th. Got some rations. I ate quite hearty for a prisoner, and I felt like a new man altogether. I never knew what it was to be hungry before. I was so weak I could hardly stand. Oh, how good a good meal would taste, such as I could get at home, but I must not dote on such things now. Almost immediately, Samuel began to express a desire for being exchanged that was as strong as his earlier wish for the end of his enlistment. The hope for a release from prison never left him. May 25th. This is surely mighty dull. I sleep all day. Don't I wish I could stop in some of our New England farmhouses and get a cup of milk? But never mind. I'm looking forward with strong anticipations for our time of exchange. Then it will be like a new heaven for me and my comrades. Andersonville was a dreadful place. In an area about twice the size of Emerson Field, up to 30,000 Union prisoners were held. 13,000 of them died. June 4th. It is sad to see them carry the dead by into the dead house, a continual train of them all the time. How I hope that I shall live through it and be permitted to enjoy the true fruition of my life, which I have put so much confidence in and placed such bright anticipations upon. For the next 3 months, Samuel's diary records in woeful detail life, such as it is, in Andersonville. He was sick nearly the whole time, and while there are occasional expressions of sorrow, Samuel knew better than to give in to self-pity. A fellow in Company G died at 8 this evening through mere discouragement. Think I shall stand it, but it is rough indeed. It seems especially cruel that a new group of prisoners should have brought Samuel the news of Asa's death. July 10th. Today, sad news indeed, I must record. I learned by one of the prisoners brought in that Brother Asa was shot through the heart while charging the breastworks at Petersburg, June 16, 1864. A faithful natural philosopher to the very end, Samuel recorded a great deal of suffering, along with kind thoughts of his friends in K Company, thoughts of his brother James and sister Caroline, memories of the place where he first saw light, and a desire to see the little starry flag again. I will conclude with the last line from Samuel Melvin's diary. September 15th. As things look now, I stand a good chance to lay my bones in old Georgia. But I'd hate to as bad as one can, for I want to go home.